Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, June 24th installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone, and I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman, technology reporter for NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove, and our host, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. So, Scott, we're recording this on Thursday because looks like you may be going back into the courtroom tomorrow for the Sunny Balwani trial. What's the status of that? You said it was getting kind of interesting.
Yeah, closing arguments have happened. So both sides have wrapped up their witnesses, their testimony. Now we've got closing arguments, and it's at the very, very end even of that. So as you and I speak right now, the jury is about to get this case, and they will decide the fate of Sunny Balwani, former partner of Elizabeth Holmes, former COO of Theranos, also accused of many, many counts, 12, in fact, of investor and patient fraud. And the big question is, given that the prosecution case was very similar against Balwani as it was to Holmes, and she was convicted on 4 counts, what does the jury decide to do with Sunny Balwani? And obviously, I'm no legal expert. I have no idea what they're going to do, but have sat through this trial as well. And, there's a lot of evidence that he was in on those meetings, both with investors and the labs. And that's what they're trying to do, is prove that he also had a hand in running this company that, according to the previous trial, fraudulently took money from investors.
Okay, so I'm kind of two minds about the results of this trial. On the one hand, Elizabeth Holmes was kind of a sympathetic figure. I mean, there was a lot of things that came out that made her unsympathetic, but she looked sympathetic. She had some stories, personal stories about, being manipulated and all that. Balwani doesn't strike me as a sympathetic figure. Did you see anything in the course of the trial that suggested that he might be a victim too? I mean, he doesn't sound at all like a victim. He sounds like a perpetrator.
Well, he was not portrayed as a victim in this case. And you're right, that is a difference from what we heard from Elizabeth Holmes. And, for one thing, Balwani didn't testify, so he never talked about anyone that had wronged him. His role, according to his attorneys, was that as more of a financier, someone who came in when the company needed money. And after all, it was his girlfriend, so he was there to help. And they're trying to paint him as not a victim of anything other than an investor who lost money. So a victim perhaps of the market, of a company that ultimately didn't work, etc., but not as a victim of anything else. And I don't know if that vulnerability kept Holmes from being convicted on more counts or helped her, but I do know that she was a very, very compelling witness. And we did not see that from Balwani because they did not bring him to the stand. And it's hard to say. We knew in advance that Holmes would be a good witness because we had seen her. I had interviewed her. We knew that she was a really good, compelling speaker who convinced a lot of people to part with a lot of money. None of us have ever talked with Sunny Balwani, so I have no idea if he would have been good on the stand. But when his own defense team decided, let's keep him off, that tells you something.
Well, look, when a startup has one of the major investors come in to take over matters, that's usually not a friendly situation. I mean, they usually come in with a meat axe. So if you've had any experience in a startup in financial trouble, it's hard to think that or believe that Sunny Balwani was just a guy that came in to try to make the machinery run better.
Right. And especially in Silicon Valley, the COO position, and I brought it up before, that's Sheryl Sandberg's position. This is a very powerful position, both in a startup and a well-formed company. And we saw Theranos as Balwani's COO, in his COO tenure, go from a much smaller company to a $9 billion startup, huge unicorn that was getting all sorts of press. And you just can't say that a COO was in the background throwing money at things. That's just not how it works.
A CEO can say, well, I was on the road a lot. I was raising money. I wasn't dealing with the details of daily life. A CEO can never make that claim. They're there every day. They know everybody. They're involved in every decision.
Right. And that was the prosecution's case against Balwani. And it seems like they did a fairly good job. And we didn't hear the defense do all that much. In fact, at one point, while they were back and forth, the defense was saying this is just an investor. He was just in the background. And the prosecution put up on the big screen a text message from Balwani to Holmes that said, I am responsible for everything at Theranos. So
Ooh.
once again, the text messages come back to haunt Sunny
Yeah,
Balwani.
that's a serious paper trail right there. You almost don't need anything else.
Yet
Okay.
another version in the last year of this trial where I thought to myself, don't text anything that could ever come back to haunt you.
So are you now on jury watch? I mean,
Yeah, as soon as it
go
goes
out
to
and do your
jury,
stories every day, but if you're waiting for the phone call, you may have to drop everything and race over to the courthouse?
that's usually how it goes. Now, during the Holmes trial, we were there every day anyway, having to turn stories on nothing for like 7 or 8 days until the jury
That
came
was a
back.
celebrity, the whole country, whole world was watching that one. Is anybody really watching the Balwani trial? They're just waiting for the verdict.
I think so. The number of press went up quite a bit during the last week with the closing arguments. I'm sure it will go up again with a verdict, but there has not been. This has been a pretty lonely experience for me, whereas the Holmes trial was just the opposite. I was constantly, hearing from everybody all over the country about this. The Balwani interest is just way, way down. And, we've talked about why before, but I think a verdict will be interesting because, again, these two are co-defendants. So if the verdict comes down on Balwani, as it did on Holmes, we might see two people going for some jail time.
Yeah, well, I think if Balwani really gets hammered much more than Holmes, I think there's going to be the attitude, well, the woman got off easier than the man.
I mean, there's going to be, just like there was with her entire trial, there's going to be a lot written on all of this and why get there.
Don't you sense the Valley has decided to move on after the Holmes verdict? Yeah, the Balwani trial, people are tracking it in the corner of their mind, but there's a lot more things we're worried about now. There's a lot of new companies. There's all sorts of major events like Twitter and Elon.
Right. You're right. I think the only concern and things that people are watching is how much jail time will these two get? And will it be enough to be a deterrent for fraud in the future when it comes to startups?
Well, the sentencing is coming up pretty quick for Holmes, isn't it?
No, not quick. It's coming up in September. We still have a while. Yeah.
Oh, this idea of a speedy trial and all that, I think we lost that a few years back.
Right.
Okay. Well, I guess you'll be back in September covering the story. This has become your lifestyle for the last, 3 years now?
I guess I can say I dabble in court cases now. Yes.
You'd be an expert by now.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about some other things. We'll move on just like the Valley has. Mark Zuckerberg is talking about the Metaverse again. Well, I guess after you name your company after it, you got to kind of talk about it every once in a while. He said there's $10 billion being spent this year on Meta.
Yeah, and I believe it was a similar number that was spent and lost, if you will, last year, which is why the stock tanked so badly earlier this year. Zuckerberg is clearly throwing everything he has at this, including his company's value, including, I believe, Sheryl Sandberg, who left, I'm guessing, partly because the metaverse is not her thing.
Her under the bus. I guess she wasn't even invited to the Meta meetings.
Right.
Talking about COOs that don't do anything, she was literally put in that role.
Yeah, I mean, maybe she wanted to keep her legs as not go into the metaverse where you seem to lose half your body. And again, it's just not for consumers yet. I know that Meta wants people to believe that you're going to go shopping in the metaverse and do your traveling and meeting and all that. We're just not doing it yet. And so it's one of those things where Wall Street has decided we'll see it when we believe it. And this might be some sort of a future play. But when you throw around a figure like $10 billion, people raise their eyebrows and they say, for what? Facebook, Instagram, these are already places, WhatsApp, that we go to in droves, for better or for worse. Do we need yet another platform and yet an added risk to our privacy and security?
Right. And Zuckerberg is coming obviously in with this sort of glow of the guy who created this multi-billion-dollar, billion user entity called Facebook. But you look at the history of Facebook, he didn't go in, and start this thing, halfway through. He built this from scratch and grew it organically. He's never done anything quite like this. The other parts of Facebook were all acquisitions. And now he's He's starting to look a little bit. Now, he may be completely vindicated, and we'll all go, my God, he was a visionary. He saw this coming, and we were fools. But he's starting to look a little bit like Ahab right now, chasing this great white whale. And he's risking his whole company on it. I mean, this could either be an enormous historic victory, or this could be one of the best books ever, business books ever written, about a guy whose ego drove him to kill, this huge, incredibly important and influential company. And we don't even know yet. I mean, if I was a shareholder, I'd be scared to death right now, holding stock in Facebook.
Yeah, and the value of that stock has gone down more than half since October. That tells you something. And this is really a textbook case, like you say, success or failure of one person having all the marbles. He's got the voting shares, he's got control of the company. This is his vision. And right, we don't really know what the board of directors are saying. We don't know what a lot of the employers are saying about this. We have some idea of what Sheryl Sandberg said about this, but we really are just watching his vision play out, and the vision of, a big name that doesn't get mentioned as much anymore, but Palmer Luckey. Remember, he's the guy that came to Zuckerberg with the Oculus and said, hey, here's a way to sort of transform, yourself into another world. And clearly Zuckerberg bought it and is still paying for it. And so are the shareholders.
Yeah. Just by coincidence, I got an announcement from Lowe's, the hardware store, appliance store. And they've announced that their customers will be able to enter the metaverse and use augmented reality to help them visualize a project they are working on. The company's metaverse collection includes free downloads of 500 products, such as chairs and other items, which are available on its own hub. It's all emerging. It's all up for exploration. Lowe's Executive Vice President and Chief Brand Officer Marisa Thalberg told CNBC. Now, maybe this is the real metaverse, which is just basically a supercharged version of Amazon, where you can say, let me see it in red. If that's the metaverse, maybe Zuckerberg is talking big vision, but the reality is much more, quotidian, which is just, it's kind of an augmentation to what we already have. And we'll settle for that, and we'll be happy, and he'll make a lot of money.
Right. And the key is what we already have. What you just described, to me, makes a lot of sense. Architects use it, planners use it. We want to see something virtually before you build it. They did that with the Hummer. They did that, by the way, at Santa Clara University, you may remember, with that library, but they used a different company called Second Life. You may remember Second Life. They designed the entire gigantic library there at Santa Clara in Second Life before they built it. And I remember doing stories on that and thinking, hey, this makes a lot of sense, because if there are mistakes, design mistakes, or, oh, we need more space for that, it all makes sense. But let's not pretend that this is brand new. That's,
No.
This Second Life thing was more than a decade ago. And this AR type technology has been around. Very, very good use, very important use. Plan your trip, check out your home, do things before you actually lay down the actual foundations. But it's not new, and it's not how we use Facebook.
The shift to it has been incremental. The idea that Zuckerberg seems to be presenting is, go into this new world. It's complete, and you can inhabit it, and you can spend half your life there. A chilling thought by itself, which gets them, it's got, Jordan sent us, told us about what's going on Instagram, about the comments about Zuckerberg's remarks about Meta, and they're pretty funny. I mean, it's interesting. Okay, 60-year-olds aren't going to use this. In fact, you can just go on the web and see memes of people falling over coffee tables and crashing, putting their hands through TV sets and all that. So, I mean, older folks are never going to adopt this, but it looks like the young people, like the Generation Z, are finding this whole thing risible. I mean, they're making jokes about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a way to enhance gaming, and that's going to catch on, I think. It's a way to take in, let's say, a virtual concert with people that are far away. I don't want to do that. The only concerts I ever want to see are in person with real people. And I'm not Generation Z, believe me, I'm not the audience you're talking about here. But does that audience, which is now growing into jobs where they make them be on Zoom anyway, want to go to meetings in the metaverse? No, there's nothing exciting or sexy about that. This is going to be a platform that sort of enhances the gaming experience, helps shoppers and architects a little bit. And it's really on Facebook to come up with any other use, because I haven't seen any other use. And this technology has been around for a while now.
Yeah, and I don't want to completely discount it. I mean, you remember the teleconferencing technology that Cisco had years ago, and it was, it was interesting. You used it a little bit; it was fine. But we look back and we go, "Oh, that's a precursor to Zoom." Okay.
Look, I was at the Zoom IPO, got in that morning as a reporter, and I was covering it. And they were like, hey, look what we can do. We can meet virtually. And I thought, all right, that's not new, but I get the idea that it's not just for business, and maybe that'll catch on someday. and obviously it did, not all that much longer later.
We had to shut down the whole world.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what does it take for the metaverse to become the new social platform? Who knows? But I have not met an age group, young or old.
Make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, I just haven't met an age group that's excited about this yet. And there's plenty of time, and Zuckerberg has plenty of money, but investors are impatient. I think employees are impatient. And I just, at some point, he's got to go show some results other than, hey, here's a sort of a demo of a prototype headset that looks clunky and awkward.
Well, if he pulls it off, he goes down in history, business history, as a great visionary. If it goes down in flames, he'll be just as famous in the reverse sense. So you got to give him credit for Stones. I mean, this guy's taking a giant risk on this thing. So we'll see. If I'm still alive, we'll talk about it one of these days, maybe 25 years from now. Okay, tech stocks. Falling, we have bad news, we had good news. Tech stocks, we had a couple interesting days on the market last week, going up, but stocks are still falling, except in Silicon Valley, we have good news. I mean, you sent me this, is very interesting. The unemployment rate in Silicon Valley is now 1.8%, which is the lowest jobless rate in 30 years in the Valley. That's kind of interesting. I mean, you got to figure out what are the underlying forces that are making this so contrary to everywhere else.
Because I just think that we're still peaking when it comes to tech and Silicon Valley. And what I mean by that is we've been waiting for the waves of layoffs to hit these tech companies. And maybe, as we've guessed, and as history has shown us, a big drop in stock price precurses that. And we've seen the big drop in stock price, but we haven't yet seen a lot of layoffs. But what we have seen is a real hiring binge. And that even happened during the pandemic, when companies not only added workers, but really couldn't figure out where to cut and trim the sails, because it was just it's been a hard time to figure out, with everybody working at home, what to do. And so we've got really high employment in Silicon Valley, which is great news in the tech industry. I think it's hanging by a thread. I think it's a little tenuous right now, but those numbers were interesting to show that as stocks went up, companies hired a ton of people, even during the pandemic, which didn't happen in most industries. But right now, I put that figure out there to say, okay, let's check back in 3 months and 6 months and 9 months to see if in this time of downfall of not only the overall economy, but specifically in tech, can employment levels remain high here? Who knows?
Yeah, I would have thought that this would have happened, that the reduction of employment would have started earlier, because it was so easy to hire people in the Zoom era during the pandemic. You don't have to give them an office. You don't have to have new facilities. You can just say, you're hired, turn on your machine. Here's your new Zoom number. Done. And you got an employee. You would have thought they would have stripped away some of those people, but apparently demand is still strong enough in a lot of these areas. They're not doing it. They're keeping those people.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still in the pandemic era in a lot of ways. I mean, how many people do you know? There are some now that are going into work, yes, but there are still a lot of people working remotely. And not just because of the pandemic, but because companies figured they could. And now they're trying to do this dance with their employees to get them back in some cases, in many cases. But the employees are sort of dancing back and saying, hey, actually, I like this better, and our bottom line has been okay. So
Maybe
eventually,
the ultimate long tail.
yes.
This could go on for a long time.
Yes. And I think that is what may ultimately trim the sails, is people saying, I'd rather quit than go back to work. This whole great resignation thing that I think got blown out of proportion, but there is a kernel of truth there. That, and the fact that these companies' valuations are just getting hammered at some point, is going to hit the employment bottom line.
Well, usually the first place we see it is in housing, right? And we've talked about this before. There are rumors, and I know you've heard them too, that asking prices have fallen, that the listing price, that these things are selling for, they're listing them pretty low. They're still getting, a lot of bids, and they're selling it above list, but the actual listing numbers are being reduced by people selling their houses and their agents. Are you seeing a lot of that?
Yeah. And when it comes to the agents, it is a gradual cycle. And we're at the part of the cycle now where we're not seeing as many multiple offers, and we're not quite seeing as many, buying purchase prices much higher than the offer price. And part of that is A, things have gotten so expensive, but B, with mortgage rates higher, buyers now know they're getting into a much more expensive proposition at 6% than it was at 3%, especially for homes around here. And so I think they're a little hesitant to pull the trigger, which means we're going to see, I think, those asking prices drop. And right, it's anecdotal right now. I'm hearing, okay, we're dropping some of the prices, but it hasn't been a widespread takedown of the housing market as it was in 2008. I don't know that the situation is going to get anywhere near that dire, but it would be nice to see a slowdown, just so that more people can get into housing in the first place.
I have to admit, we've changed so much that when I get these flyers, real estate flyers around Sunnyvale, houses for sale, and I see a place and it's 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and it's 2.7 million. And I go, wow, that's a steal. That's how much we changed over the years. We'll see. I notice high-end houses, but that's always the case. They don't really suffer as much from this kind of thing. Right. They hold their prices. I want to look in some of the neighborhoods of Santa Clara and Sunnyvale and Cupertino. Well, not Cupertino, maybe Campbell, to look at 3 and 2s, 3 and 1s, and see if they're starting to really drop in price.
Right. And I think one thing
that's a canary in the coal mine right now.
Yeah, but when you go into those areas, one thing I think you'll find is they're not dropping in price all that much, because there's just still not that much inventory out there.
True enough.
And part of that, supply chain concerns, et cetera. But there's just not a whole lot of inventory on the market, and therefore there's still demand because there's not all that much supply. And that's another thing we need to see, is more housing. That solves a lot of concerns, but it also helps the price concern.
Well, let's see what happens in the next few months as mortgage payments get readjusted. All the people that had variable.
Right.
Okay. Time flies, department. Tesla Model S has turned 10 years old. It's in the back of our world changes in the world of Moore's law, everything changes so fast that a lot of things seem like they've been around forever, but they also got introduced the day before yesterday. And I kind of feel that way about Tesla. Now that I think about it, yeah, I've been seeing Teslas driving around Silicon Valley for a decade, and yet they still seem like the new thing.
Yeah, I mean, and the Model S, remember, was the second car. The Roadster was the first one. And we saw that in limited numbers. And then the S came out. And although it was, again, prohibitively expensive for most of us, you started to see people, saying, hey, this is something my family can ride in, and we won't use gas. And it was still a bit of a novelty at the time. Gas wasn't obviously anywhere where it is now, but it was a boost to the environment. It was, a status thing. I remember the story doing on Steve Jurvetson. He's the venture capitalist that had the first one off the line because he was an early investor. We heard from other VC types like Jason Calacanis, who got his early. And these are people who were like, hey, we're the first ones. But to me, the most important thing was the people I knew, that had a bunch of money that could say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take this plunge and no longer need gas. And think of it 10 years later, which, like you said, is not all that long. We're seeing EVs everywhere. And that's what people want now.
Yeah. And the Roadster, yeah, it was interesting, but it looked like a Lotus and you really didn't notice it that much. But the S, First time I saw an S on, I think it was on 880 or something, I was like, wow, okay, it's real. It's actually happening. Now, let me give you some specs. It had a 40 kilowatt battery pack rated for 160 miles, and it cost $57,400. That was the original S. Today, a new one, basic model, costs $104,990, has standard all-wheel drive and a range of 405 miles per charge. And there's a 1,000 horsepower version, which is 135.9. You know, that's not bad. I mean, it's expensive, but it's no more expensive than it was then. And the price increase compared to the performance increase is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it's still, and remember, this was Musk's original version, was sell a bunch of really expensive cars to sort of keep the company afloat, and then eventually get into the less expensive car. And that's been the big seller, the Model 3, the Model Y, and those prices have crept up too. They're up to now near 50 and 60,000 instead of the 30 and 40. But it's still, given what cars cost, a decent price. And one thing that people can always say is, think of the hundreds of dollars, if not even more, a month you're saving by not have to go to the gas pump.
Especially right now.
Yeah.
I was talking to a buddy, he has a pretty powerful pickup, and he spends $200 to fill his gas tank right now. That amounts pretty quickly, especially if you got to commute.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, well, let's make this personal. You have a 3. How long ago did you get it?
Almost 4 years ago. And that was a time when my wife and I both decided to get EVs. And, I can tell you that's a bit of a risk when there's no gas car.
Riskier then than it is now to make that choice.
Right. And the interesting thing is we did it purely for environmental reasons. But now, a few years later, our friends think we're financial geniuses. but that wasn't, you get the big rebate. I mean, my car was in the 30,000 range, which wow, ultimately is great. If you don't get a whole lot of things, you can get an EV fairly cheap. And so here we are, still trying to do our part. And if you are a little careful and watch a little more closely, you can do this with EVs, like we could have with gas cars. So it can be done.
Will you buy another one?
Oh, absolutely. I'm done with gas. I don't know what brand. The happy thing.
That's my next question. Would you buy a Tesla?
I mean, I don't know that I can afford to buy a different one, or that I'll ever be able to afford to buy a different model. But the really good thing, and I needed this when I needed it because I need a range because I drive a lot for work. But the thing that really makes me happiest is that there are so many others with good ranges now. And, for whatever, you have a big family, buy an SUV, you have you need a big sedan, buy this, a small sedan. They're coming out with these things, and it's proven that people will buy it. It's proven that people will do this. And I think that's the way to go. When you say goodbye to the gas pump, it's a good feeling.
We know that the first car was bought by Weblog founder Jason Calacanis, the actual first purchaser, and he still has it.
Right.
And he's offered to give it back to Elon if he wants it. But he said, otherwise, I'll just keep it. It's running fine. He uses it occasionally just to go shopping or whatever he does on a weekend. But he's got number 1. I'm sure it'll sell for a lot of money one of these days at, one of these big auto auctions. But that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, maybe at the 10-year anniversary, we'll start to see some of that.
Okay. Actually, the price of these things right now are a pretty good deal because raw material report from Elix Partners, raw material costs for electric vehicles have more than doubled during the pandemic and since. It's hard to get cobalt, in the Congo and that sort of thing. So I think we're going to start seeing prices go up on electric vehicles. We'll see. Real quick news. Tim Cook has hinted that Apple is working on a headset. Okay. Apple
hinting, we haven't seen anything. He hasn't, he's not even hinting at Macworld. So he's hinting in interviews, overseas or something. I'll believe this when I see it.
Yeah. And Apple has a habit of hinting at stuff that takes 4 times as long to deliver, but it's an interesting. Elon has clarified that Tesla will only lay off 3.5% of its workforce. It turns out TikTok, the Chinese government has dipped into TikTok quite a few times looking for personal information. I don't think the people that use TikTok give a damn about that. We might for national security reasons, but they don't care. And finally, the kicker. You sent me this one. I'm sure you keep up on this kind of stuff. Beyonce's new song is being called a paean to quitting your job, The Great Resignation.
Yeah, so I played it.
What, 40, 42, 43, somewhere in there, and she's still on top of her game.
I mean, there's no doubt about that. And
it makes Madonna look like a piker. Madonna kept it going for 20 years. I think Beyonce can go on forever. I mean, she's really tuned into the zeitgeist.
And the zeitgeist is what I thought when I heard that song for the first time. And I thought, wow, she's talking about, taking care of yourself, maybe quitting your job. And I thought, this is on the minds of literally an entire country, possibly the entire world. And what do you know? There she is singing about it. Good for her. And, instantly I was just checking out the comments and they were picking that up right away. And again, she's immensely talented, all that stuff. And to also say, hey, I'm going to tap into what everyone is thinking about right now is just amazing. It's wonderful.
Go for it, Beyonce. Stay forever young. And thanks to Jay-Z's money and probably yours, you can look forever young.
Oh, I think she probably brings more to that. She brings more to that marriage, I think, than he does money-wise. And that's saying something.
That's saying a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, LinkedIn, and of course on YouTube. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.